two things that I strongly believe are one, that your college decision is one of the most important decisions you will make in your life because it sets you up for where you're going to live, who you're going to work with, and what you want to pursue as a career. Two, I believe that there is no one size fits all roadmap for aspiring entrepreneurs, which is why I started this video series, Entrepreneurs and Education, where I interview successful young entrepreneurs about their college choices, what classes were useful, what classes weren't, what decisions they would have made differently, how to pursue education outside of academia, and other fun stories about their entrepreneurial journey at large. My name is Megan Sharkus. I started my company Expression Med when I was 17. I went to college for 2 years and then left my third year and accepted the Thiel Fellowship so that I could focus on my business full-time. 7 years later, at age 24, I own 100% of a company that makes 7 figures annually, and I think I know what I'm talking about when it comes to bootstrapping a direct-to-consumer product. I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to starting a technology company or raising funds from investors. So for that reason, I've done a series of interviews to help collect stories from all sorts of entrepreneurs so that people who are just getting started feel supported and know a little bit more about the other side of these big decisions. I'm excited to kick off this series with an interview of Jasmine Wang, the founder of CopySmith. She is a Thiel Fellow that started her business after attending college and discovering unknown unknowns, or cutting-edge technology that she had no idea about before attending college. This is the perfect episode for someone who is interested in learning how to build a tech company and balancing education and creation at the same time. So, Jasmine, without further ado, I'd love to hear your quick explanation of what you do now, your favorite accomplishments, where you went to school, and how long you stayed there. And that can be all jumbled or however you want to put that
Yeah,
together.
totally. Maybe I'll start chronologically. And thank you so much for having
Yeah.
me on. I miss Mexico, calling in from
Oh, yeah.
Canada right now.
That's so
I'm
cool.
currently visiting family. But yeah, just quick chronological background. Grew up here in Edmonton, Alberta, went to McGill University for school, actually transferred from a different university. Really long story that we can get into. But started out school in comparative literature, switched into CS after going to my first hackathon, was totally just like enamored with being able to create things out of thin air. Like it really felt like conjuring. It felt like an act of like magic that I was able to put up a website and make something that I'd been working on for months more real in this like very small act that took a few minutes. It was almost more weighty than like the many months of work. Then I worked a bunch in the Bay Area, living there in the first time, just like really opened my eyes, met a lot of friends who were dropping out, made a lot of friends who were part of the Thiel Fellowship. First heard about the Thiel Fellowship while I was in the Bay. And CopySmith was born during COVID, actually, when I had left the Bay Area, was quarantining in Edmonton with my family, did most of the work for CopySmith sitting in this chair in front of this wall, pitched most folks like from this desk, which is actually a dining table. GPT-3 had just come out in the middle of the pandemic, and it felt like the only things that were on my Twitter feed were GPT-3 and COVID. And I'm an optimist. I try to focus on the things that are exciting and magical. And I spent a week playing with GPT-3 when it first came out, and it just really opened my eyes to what AI could do. My background is in natural language processing. After comparative literature, I still was obsessed with words and language, and artificially generated language was just the coolest intersection of those two things. Started playing around with different products, like for generating sales emails, was just blown away at how natural GPT-3 was, and the fact that you could actually interact with it in a natural manner. Received the Thiel Fellowship in September, actually for a novel that I was working on. Launched the company on Product Hunt in October, and was like really blessed to have a very quick exit where we ended up selling the company to Providence Strategic Growth in February. And since then, I've been putting together a tech magazine as part of Reboot, where I'm the editor-in-chief that will be coming out in the fall. And I've also signed my first nonfiction book deal, which is really, really exciting. That will also be covering AI. Um, Maybe I'll point out one other achievement, which is I'm a classical pianist. And I have,
Oh,
these are actually degrees not from school. People always ask, they're actually for classical piano. They're equivalent to like a bachelor's and a master's in piano performance. And it's actually the most rigorous education I've had has been in music, which is kind of strange, but we can dive into that. That's my
yeah.
quick
Oh, that's
backstory.
so amazing. Yeah, so you're like the perfect person to talk to for this because you're an obvious creative, and then you have like these like you're basically a serial entrepreneur with all these different types of projects and these different educational paths. But I'm gonna start by questioning way back in the beginning, like the type of listeners we have now are at that age, like 17 or 18. They're starting to talk to their parents, starting to think about graduation. Before all of these amazing, wonderful things happen, what was that experience like for you when you were trying to decide what to study and where to study? Because you're obviously extremely talented in piano, you're an extremely talented writer, and at some point you got exposed to hackathons, which I assume is in college because you eventually transferred. But what was it like at like 17 and 18? How is it in your world?
To be honest with you, I was totally, totally lost. As I think
Mhm.
a lot of folks, as a lot of people become entrepreneurs from a study when they realize that their skills are not adequately rewarded by the job marketplace. And
Yeah,
I can actually bring this earlier in someone's life where at 17 and 18, I didn't feel like any of the degrees that were on offer perfectly fit the thing that I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to start organizations one day and run them. But when I told people while I was in Edmonton, which is a really small city in the sense of like there's a million people, but it's far away from centers of power or influence or commerce, that I want to study business, they would ask me like, Jasmine, do you want to be a bank teller? I was like, no, like I want to start
yeah,
companies. Like it was a different scale of ambition than I think people were used to around me. And I think because of that, I felt quite lost because I didn't have many role models to look up to whose paths I really respected. And to this day, I'm still searching for role models of this form. It's an ongoing question. How I approached this question was, how can I maybe I'll say how I approached it, and I can
yeah,
also add how I wish I had approached it. So how
yeah,
I approached it was a very simple pros cons list of every university. I ended up getting full scholarships to all the Canadian universities that I wished to attend, and in the end, it became a very monetary calculation, which was very
yeah,
weird. It's like, oh, like this university, like the scholarship is actually worth this much because the tuition is more expensive, which is an
yeah,
irrational way of like putting value to something. You should not be thinking about money. I think what I wish I had thought about was, what are the sorts of people who I think I would meet? What are the sorts of people um, who I'm not even aware of, who cannot even like have thought to encounter? When you think about knowledge of the world, you can kind of separate out into a quadrant of what are my known knowns, as in like what are the things I know about the world and I know that I know them. What are my unknown knowns? This is a bit complicated, but what are the things that I know but I don't know that I know them? My
yeah,
my known unknowns, like the things that I know I don't know. For example, I still don't understand how nuclear fission works. Like I
yeah,
might never understand. I don't understand how to play violin, but I know that I don't know those things. And finally, they're the unknown unknowns. And I think as a person who is seeking like extreme upward trajectory and also is like fairly young, like in high school, this is the most important quadrant, is like, what are the things that I don't even know that I don't understand about the world? And based off of that decision heuristic, if I had prioritized that, I would have chosen probably the largest university in the largest city possible. Because I think in a
yeah,
larger city, you just encounter, like, I would have chosen the University of Toronto, I think, over where I originally went, which was Western, which is in a small city. Because although that better served my goals at the time, throughout university, I kept learning new things that changed those goals and changed my level of ambition for what I could accomplish in the world. And I think changing that, like understanding, knowing that your goals might change, means that you should actually seek to uncover unknown unknowns with your university decisions, with your degree decisions as much as possible. Bit of unconventional advice, but I'm also very happy I started out in comparative literature. But I think the thing was, I knew that I might change. I was open to change. I went to a
Yeah.
hackathon. I instantly updated. I didn't take it as, oh, I've sunk 2 months into this, therefore this dictates the rest of my life. I took it as, oh, this is unknown, unknown. I didn't know there was this whole world of people just building stuff and making stuff. And as soon as I saw that and recognized that I wanted to be in it, I let myself feel that and acknowledge that I did not know about this thing before, but that was okay. Um, that was a very
Yeah.
strange way of answering this question, but
No,
hopefully that.
that was such a good way of going through this question because I think it really speaks to the time. And I can definitely relate because I went to a school purely for the scholarships. I was like, how am I going to start a business if I have student loan debt? And I think a lot of kids right now who are making college considerations have watched their parents and older generation siblings go through the student loan crisis. So that money consideration is like very, very strong. And while debt is something to be very serious about, it's also like money is something that comes and goes and fluctuates throughout life. But like if you think about the access to the unknown unknowns and the access to people from different walks of life and like knowing what your opportunities are, like the unknown of the knowns. I think I've never heard someone phrase it like that, but I think that's extremely, extremely valuable. My
Me too.
next question is so you made these decisions and you experienced, like you said, not net loss, but you experienced this education in literature and then additionally this education in computer science. And can you talk a bit about both and what, like, there's students these days where people are kind of misinforming them that their college degree is worthless and they're not going to get anything out of school. And I know I personally got things out of school, and I know you got things out of school or these hackathons. So, out of these programmings, what are key lessons or key like learning opportunities or classes? Are you like, oh, I'm so glad I took this element of literature class, or I'm so glad that I went to because it introduced me to these people? What were those value points where education was very worth it and it translated into utility for you?
Yeah, I want to answer this in a few ways.
Yeah,
So I think first I'll talk about some topics that I think are
yeah.
important, and then two like general parts of the college experience that I think, or just education in general. So in terms of topics, the most important things I learned in school were actually not technical. They were
Mm.
like critical thinking and more theory. So I'm obviously like a lover of the humanities. Like I just think there's so much value in fiction. If I were to try to explain why humanities is valuable to, I guess, like a typical technical audience, I'd say they allow us to imagine worlds that do not exist yet. They allow us to imagine worlds as they like might be. They allow like humanities gives us the tools to criticize both like what exists now, but also like think about how we might make them better. It gives us language for the ways that we like exist in the world and understand our own experience and so many other things. Like not even to get into, I mean, the debate right now about like should we have ethics training for computer science students. It's not even just about reading about different ethical systems. um, I think there's so much that's outside of formal philosophy, like even in like critical theory or literature, that is just so valuable that will not be taught to you in the workplace precisely because it's not really useful. It is only
Mhm.
useful, it does not teach you how to be successful within systems that have been set out for you. It teaches you to like resist those systems or think about alternative systems. Um, but I think that's where actually first principles thinking can actually come from. A lot of the first principles thinking, I think, that's advocated for within technical spheres still have basic assumptions. For example, still assuming individuals as like the basic unit, but now we're seeing new forms of thinking about the individual in, for example, crypto and
Yeah.
decentralized autonomous organizations, where it's what if the world didn't look like that? What if we could have more collective decision making. And that sort of thinking might not have even been possible without like some
Yeah.
very important philosophical and political texts. So I would push folks in CS not just to think about ethics and philosophy, but actually to bridge into like humanities, critical theory. Some of the most impactful courses I've taken have been in psychology, political science, um, and philosophy of science. So those are
Yeah.
different topics I would super encourage folks to explore. And also, they introduce you to new problem spheres. So, for example, it's hard to
Yeah.
build a music tech product if you don't have a background in theory. You definitely could, but there's definitely enriching parts of the experience where, like, if you didn't study architecture, there's stuff that you might miss. So I just encourage people to try other things that you would not be taught at your job, because there's many, many ways to pick up technical skills now that employers want to train you to know. And then maybe the question you can ask yourself is, what are things that people will not naturally teach me? Those are the things you might want to seek out for yourself in a university context. Um, the second thing I would mention here is community. So I find a lot of folks, and I'm curious as to your experience having gone through the
Yeah.
Thiel Fellowship as well, is people a lot of people, especially I was totally an outsider, in a not in a way that I was, like, ostracized during high school. I was just different, and
Hmm.
this differentness is so, so precious. It's so amazing. It's so fundamental to entrepreneurship and feeling like you have a different perspective on the world and, like, want to do something, but it's also very isolating.
Yeah.
And something that dropping out sometimes creates is furthering and heightening this sense of isolation. And one thing about school that is quite beautiful, if you can find your people, is that you can find your people there. And there's
Yeah.
something really precious about that, even though I imagine a lot of the audience might feel like, for example, whoa, I feel like really different from people my age. A lot of my friends, for example, are usually 4 to 5 years older than me. And
Mhm.
that's because you progress through life stages really differently after age 18. Some people don't go to college. Some people drop out of college. People start companies. These lead you through life experiences that take you through life stages in different orders or at different rates. And what's nice about university is that you're kind of all going through the same life stage, and there's a community that's built through that. I'm not saying that this is necessarily worth it. I don't,
Mhm.
that's a different trade off for everybody, but it's just something to be
Yeah.
aware of. If you do out of school, or at least it was the case for me, I had to be really, really intentional about like building friendships, about building community, and hold it as a really core value. Because I think folks don't, I'm gonna stop saying folks don't. I'm gonna say me.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't realize after I could operate as sort of this individual, like charting your own path for some time, and people will get behind you and support you, but you're always gonna like have your own lows, and
Yeah.
there are some things that only like real community can support you there for. Like your investors cannot be there for you, your employees
Yeah.
will not be there for you,
Yeah.
and mm, community building is just so huge. So I will say that about school.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I absolutely love the lessons that you talked about because 'cause I've never heard it phrased specifically like that. Like, when you're in school, you should be trying to learn things that people aren't naturally going to want to teach you for the sake of your job. Everyone's, like, really trying to double down on technical things in school, and then they fit right into just following someone else's instructions and that being their job forever, which works really, really well for people. Like, there's a great
Yeah.
reason for school to function that way. But I agree, and I never heard someone like speak about humanities the way you spoke about that, but that's how I spoke about calculus. I was like
Mm,
obsessed with calculus when I was starting my company, and people didn't understand why. And it was like with calculus, like there's a way to make the equation work. Like you might solve through it
mm.
like 800 times and it like doesn't seem to make sense, but eventually you like write it out and it works. And like the whole point of calculus is like finding the equation that makes sense, like solving for x. And I always treated my company like solving for x. And it's
Yeah.
super beautiful that you had that same experience with school, but with like a different topic. So you were like, these humanities make me think about something that doesn't exist yet and different ways to look at um, kind of how the world works and how I experience the world. and how other people experience the world in ways that an employer wouldn't push me to think about at all because there's no value to them. So I think that's really cool. And then I also agree to the point of schools forcing community, but not in a bad way. Like you find those like clubs and those people, and you're like, there's like places where students go to eat, and like everyone's kind of like when they're looking for jobs, they're all looking for jobs. And when they're getting ready to graduate, they're all getting ready to graduate. And that is like a beautiful, comfortable thing. And then, yes, leaving when I did leave school as well for the Thiel Fellowship, there was that isolation. And then trying to lean on your staff is toxic, trying to lean on your family is toxic. And then it's finding other founders. And in my case, also finding improv communities, interestingly enough. So, oh my gosh, absolutely love those two big points that you made there. My next questions are when you were in your university stages and maybe at the hackathon. I just got into like the hackathon scene very recently. Was there any classes that you felt like you were forced into taking that maybe weren't as useful, that maybe you struggled to pay attention, or were all of your classes very useful to you?
Yeah, I would. So Canada's interesting also because there are more required courses.
Yeah.
I took some biology classes, physics, not interesting to me, too abstract.
Yeah.
I couldn't grok like most of what was going on. But by
Mhm.
year 2, that really changed. Like I had a much better sense of like what I enjoyed.
Cool.
And I think the key here was actually find someone in the class who loves the topic, or go to
Yeah.
hours, go to the prof, find someone who sees beauty in the thing or just comes alive when
Yeah.
they are like talking about the topic. Like even if you can't like see the beauty in it, interacting with it via this person helps a lot. Like I have a friend, I was working through just linear algebra, and I was just
Yeah.
really banging my head against the wall. It was awful. And then my friend, who was actually just visiting from abroad, wasn't even taking the class. He just loves proofs. Like he just thinks that mathematical proofs
Oh,
are like the most holy thing. Like he really
terrifying.
just, like
Yeah.
loves them. And he would just sit with me for like hours, and I'd be like motivated to do this because he'd just be like, Jasmine, this is like the most incredible experience. Like, can you like, we're doing this? And I'm like, yeah, we're doing this. And he was like, yeah, but we're like doing this math. And the joy that they got out of it, and the joy, of course, that translated to in terms of like him being super patient and explaining things to me, being really excited when I got a thing. I think humans are like fundamentally social creatures, and you can trick yourself into liking something. Like now I have a
Yeah.
much stronger appreciation for linear algebra and for proofs, although I never thought of myself as someone who would be interested in those things, because I had a tutor who was obsessed with teaching math to me, and or just in general, like as a discipline. And then this friend who just loved it and thought it was beautiful. So I took a few classes, but actually what I would like prompt the audience to think about is like, if you have to take a course, like how can you make it a more enjoyable experience? And my number one suggestion would be, yes, office hours. People will always tell you office hours, and I plus one that. But I think the core of why office hours is finding someone who's so bought into the topic that they're excited to teach you about it. And you can find this throughout your life. You don't have to keep office hours from college. People say sometimes to me that the thing that they miss the most from college is access to professors and office hours. I'm like, well, actually, the fundamental essence of that experience is someone was excited to teach you something that they loved. And if you can find that over and over again, and everyone who you want to be talking to has something that they love and they would love to explain to you, then you'll just get so much out of that, so much mileage.
Yeah.
There's no
That's so
subject in the history
amazing.
of humanity that has been boring to everybody, else we would not
Yeah.
study it. So
Yeah, that's amazing. I've never heard it explained quite like that because people either say like just deal with it and like breeze by, like C's get degrees level. And then some people would be like mantras and like force yourself into a mindset of happiness. And like no one has, I haven't heard anyone put forth that like we are social creatures. And if you find someone who like brings that energy and light to the subject, it's a lot easier and a lot less like stressful for you to pick up on that. And I think people do forget that you can get that outside of school. Like I definitely get lunch with people in HR. Like I buy them lunch because HR terrifies me. And then early on in Expression Med, when I had to write my projections of finances and I was like 17 and had no idea where to even start with that, I did find like a master's student in financial accounting and just be like, help. And he's like, I need to help someone for my class. Like, check that box. And so, yeah, I think people forget like how useful like finding a peer could be, or finding like people think that you only go to office hours if you're failing or if you're like not intelligent. But I think if you're someone who's like, bored or like needs that like someone to liven up the subject, it can also be for that as well. So I think that's really cool. So many good things coming out of this conversation. I'm so happy. So another question that I have for you is, how outside of school now you are doing so many things, how do you keep up your like education and learning process in the day to day of being Jasmine Wang? Like, where do you learn? Who do you learn from? What are your learning goals as of now? Could you walk us through that?
Yeah. I want to do a better job at this because I think I've done a mostly passive job of, I have a set of podcasts that I listen to that my friends recommend me. I put together communities. Like I want to get really good at writing this year. So I put together a writing retreat with like 11 other people, since I learned via community and from people. And I just know this about myself. So it's a very people first approach. But I would like to set like more intense goals, and maybe just to like manifest, I can articulate some of this on the podcast, which is I would like to get really good at coaching and to some extent like coaching and therapy, because I found a lot of my friends who are early stage founders naturally like come to me with help on pitching or like talking to investors or like narrative framing around their company, because I love it, right? Like I'm a writer, I love words, I love stories, like that's my jam. But I find that there's a lot of different components around just making the story right. There's a lot of like active listening skills, communication skills. So I'm reading about different forms of therapy. Oh, pointed the wrong way, but that's a book on CBT on my bookshelf. And I'm learning by getting therapy. And same thing with personal training. I've been really curious about different forms of like building muscle. And I've just hired a personal trainer who studies this stuff full time. I learn best through tutors. Like for linear algebra, when I was struggling, I hired a tutor. There's a phenomenon called Bloom's 2 sigma effect, which is a hotly debated result, but worth quoting nonetheless, where if you're taught in a mastery learning setting, which means that the tutor makes sure that you understand a concept before moving on to the next concept. You're taught in a one-on-one mastery learning setting. This results in learning outcomes that are 2 standard deviations better than the norm, which is crazy. That means you're better than 99% of like the other people, which is insane as a learning outcome. And this just sold me on one-on-one tutoring. So I'm working with a therapist, I have a personal trainer, but I'm thinking about hiring tutors. And I have hired tutors in the past for studying game theory outside of school. I studied linear algebra outside of school. My main areas of interest right now are crypto, psychology, which relates to the therapy and coaching components, and still very, very interested in ethics, like theories around like meaning making, which is also a psychological like orientation. Or a question that comes up a lot in psychology is like, how do people make sense of their lives? How do they create meaning? So I learned through friends. I want to like buy textbooks, just read the whole textbook through. That's my like style for like learning. When I was skilling up in sociology, I was like, oh, I just like want to read all of this. I just want to get the best textbooks on every subject basically, and just like read through them and get tutors and learn together with friends.
Yeah, I think that's super cool because I think you're hitting on two key subjects that I kind of hear about when I'm talking to students, and one of them is like it's like maybe it's just like a Midwest thing, but there's this issue that people have with like personal trainers and coaches and like vocal coaches because they want to be like naturally talented or like the best player on a
Mm,
team, and they don't realize that some of these the best musicians and best basketball players and best fill in the blank, like, do you have those one-on-one coaches? And that kind of like allows them to elevate at a faster pace. And then I think with students, like if you sum up like all the money you spend like ordering in food or like going out on the weekends, getting a personal trainer for something that's really important to you is not that expensive when you think about like the value cost in your life. And I think that's super cool. And I love that you get textbooks because I did that too when I was learning German. Another thing students want to like take as few classes as possible. They're like, I can get out of here with as few classes as possible. Amazing. Like, at least, again, maybe that was just the schools and the students that I've talked to. But I think that education is such a beautiful thing. And if you're doing amazing things in the tech world and amazing things in the writing world, in the fiction and nonfiction, world wide web and publishing scene, um, you can also study up on like psychology and physiology. And in case anyone needs to know this, like extra piece of information, Jasmine taught me how to do a handstand. And so that was so exciting. So
You're natural. So yeah.
yeah, it's so fun to know those different things. And I also think for someone who wants to be an entrepreneur, because people watching this will want to be entrepreneurs, it helps take the edge off or the obsession off of your business. Because when you drop out of school, if you put 100% of your focus into your business and something goes wrong, you will feel that you'll take it very personally. It's hard not to. It's not even like a mental decision at that point. It's just like everything you think about is like wavering. And businesses always go up and down. And so I think also having those extracurricular interests and learning opportunities just help separate like the Megan from the business and the Jasmine from the business and the viewer who's watching this from their project, which I think is just such like a beautiful thing about education.
Totally.
Yeah, and then two more questions to like wrap up our convo here. Do you have any tools or tips that you just like live by? Like for me, I live by Audible. I know so many people are such visual readers and memorizers, and I'm such an Audible learner. And so I can focus better when I'm like cleaning and listening. But like, what are some tools or tips you have for people trying to kind of form their own education?
Yeah, I love Audible.
Yeah.
I actually use Libby, which you should check out
Ooh,
if you use Audible.
I don't know what
Um,
this is.
it links to your public library account, and you can just check out audiobooks on Libby, and it's free. So that's why I use it instead of Audible.
Wait, wait, that's amazing.
This might be an info hazard. This might either make you really happy or really sad.
Oh, it's fine. It's the same thing like you said. Like it's not a lost cost because I gained so much from Audible,
Yeah.
but I had no idea that this existed.
Totally. Well, now
Libby.
you'll read way more books. I also
Yes.
use a Kindle, which I
Yeah.
think is really awesome because, like Amazon, you can get books. I try not to support Amazon, but Amazon, you can get books
Yeah.
in like 2 days. But with a Kindle, you can just instantly decide, oh, I want to read this book and read it now. Because if you're anything like me, I'm really bad at to-do lists and even worse at
Yeah.
trying to remember the things that I intended to read. So as soon
Yeah.
as I like think of something and I'm like, oh, I want to read that, I download it to my Kindle right away. And then next time I open up my like computer, it's there. My Kindle, it's there. Sorry.
Yeah.
Um, I also listen to a bunch of podcasts. I would just cycle through like the top recommended to you and just like listen to one from each and just try to like get your vibe. I think just there's so much time where you're just moving around doing chores that being able to get
Yeah.
away from the computer but still feel like you're learning stuff or maybe diving into other areas of interest. Like there's really cool music podcast, Song Exploder, but just like filling your day and allowing yourself to do chores because you're being productive at the same time was really
Yeah.
a game changer for me. Like I just like learned a lot that way, and it also helped a lot with cold reach outs. Whenever I
Yeah.
decided to cold email someone, I'd listen to all the podcasts they did like the day before, and then I'd write like a perfect cold email because they like, oh, you read all my stuff. You actually like really care about who I am. So
Yeah.
love that as the first thing. Two, I don't know if this is something to help with um, learning exactly, but I think it relates both to the point that we talked about before about like preventing you getting too enmeshed with
Yeah.
company is coming up with other stable routines that support your
Yeah.
mental and cognitive functioning. So for me, this was sitting down with a dietitian and figuring out what my macros were, what I actually needed to eat like day to day to feel good, um, and getting a personal trainer, going to the gym every single day for an hour and figuring out a routine that worked for me. Because as an entrepreneur, like everything's out of your control. Like your
Yeah.
customers might call you, they hate something, something went bad. Your investors, I don't know, like are asking how you're doing, and maybe you're not doing so great. Like so many things out of your control as a founder, or your employee has a bad day. But
Yeah.
what I found like really kept me like mentally like well and just like really joyful was meditating every day, as well as like seeing the number go up in terms of amount I was lifting, because I was under my control. I could
Yeah.
just, like, challenge myself day by day. And I think having those things, especially if you're a goal oriented person, which a lot of entrepreneurs are, like just so
Yeah.
dead focused on a target, which is amazing, but sometimes things are outside of your control and you've reaching that target with your company. Make sure that there are other things that you care about achieving goals for, and it happens that maintaining your mental health and your physical health also helps you achieve those goals. So it's just like all synergistic.
Yeah.
um and also just really important for like cognitive functioning. Like you can run while like listening to stuff. It helps with mental performance. There are studies on this. Just like
Yeah.
definitely emphasize. And why I emphasize this for high school audiences, I wasn't really active in high school, and this you can get away with this until maybe you're like 20 or 21. And
Yeah.
then afterwards, your body will not like you
Yeah.
if you don't maintain healthy habits, because before then you can kind of get away with anything. But if you don't start taking care of yourself, not as a warning or anything, it's just like
Yeah.
it just really kicks in and it starts to show. um
Yeah. That's a
I'm
really
trying
good
to
point.
think.
My
I also use Twitter. I don't know if this is good or bad, but I've used it for
Yeah.
a lot of like as an information source. And I generally try to organize like book clubs, like discussion groups. I used to organize blog reading groups where I would always get distracted opening a blog on my computer. Although I knew that it was high quality content, someone would send it to me, but I'd flick around my other 100 tabs and never get back to it. So instead, I organized blog reading parties where my friends and I would just like go through lists of articles that we wanted to read, and we would discuss them together afterwards. So layering on social activities on top of things that I knew were good for me, but I would not do if I were alone, was a really good
Yeah.
strategy. You can see a theme. I'm a social learner. I like layering things
Yeah.
and like learning
And I
things
think
with
a lot of
people.
entrepreneurs are. Like, I think anyone that like wants to put something out into the world and build something and hire people, it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to do that without being social. And I think there's a lot of juxtapositions that you pointed out, and you kind of found ways of piecing them together in a way that's healthy. So, for example, you said entrepreneurs are very goal oriented, which is true, but then things can go catastrophically wrong in ways that aren't necessarily your fault. So, if you're an achiever and these things are coming at you out of left field, you can feel very unstable. And so many people think that focusing on their sleep or focusing on their diet or focusing on their like training and performance is going to be a distraction, but it's almost like a dependable form of achievement and progression that
Yeah,
no outside force can like take from you, which people
true.
never phrase it as that. So I think that's absolutely beautiful that that's how you phrase those things, because it's also extremely beneficial to your health. But like if your teacher or your parents or your friends are like, get more sleep, you're not getting sleep, that's not good. And like they don't really like explain it to you in that way, you don't really see the
Mhm.
benefits. I personally didn't see the benefits until I just did it. Like I just
Yeah,
tried
yeah,
changing my like macro consumption and sleep, and then I was like, "Oh, okay." And then, oh my gosh, you said something beautiful about cold emails. There's so many hype stories of this kid or that kid emailed 1,000 people a day. One person got back to him, and that was the person that changed his life. And I think so many kids get so excited about mass emailing people like, "Hi, I'm an entrepreneur. Will you get coffee with me?" And those emails get so spammy and overwhelming to highly intellectual people. And it usually leads to conversations where these students are asking these professionals about information they've already published and kind of like not optimizing their time with that professional. So I think what you were saying, how you like listen to podcasts that this person may have been on or read books or listen to like YouTube interviews with that person. When you do a cold email, if you tell someone something about something they've said so they know that you have a baseline understanding of what their specialty is, and then I'm not sure if you're a person who asks questions in cold emails. I always ask what I hope is an insightful question when I cold email people, and that makes them feel like one, like respected, like this person is like very thoughtful in how they're reaching out for me, and then two, like actually interested in talking to you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's something that isn't as like explained when these like cold email hype stories are shared. So I love
Yeah.
that you brought that up because I think that's really cool. Um, my last question before I wrap up here, the ending question is always super vague. Is there any other pieces of advice or stories or anecdotes that you would share to students that are interested in entrepreneurship and seeking the balance of that in education?
Yeah.
And it's
Ooh,
okay if it's nothing because you covered everything.
that's a great question. Maybe I'll point out two axes. I think very graphically and visually.
Yes.
Um, there's a two. There's one key tension I think in being a founder. Um, okay, there are many, but
Yeah.
one I would like point out, especially for young folks just starting out, is the tension between ambition and kindness. And
Hmm.
these don't necessarily trade off, but in a lot of people's mind, they do. So, like, one common thought pattern that I've seen in people is, I'm so busy, I can't make time for someone. Or
Yeah.
I am growing faster than someone, and therefore, it might not make sense for us to be friends. I'm not saying that
Hmm.
these thoughts are wrong. I just point out this tension and that people should make their own conscious decision as to where they want to lie. Like ideally, in an ideal world, a lie as in like where along the spectrum, like how heavily am I like just like prioritizing this component of my life right now, and how long will I prioritize it for? When does that stop? When do I like what's my like goal and state with this ambition? Um, yeah, because I've seen, for example, like a lot of like ambitious and unkind people, or a lot of kind but unambitious people. And actually,
Yeah.
I was like, wait, I want to be both kind and ambitious. What does this mean?
Yeah. So
And
it's like an axis, not like a line where you're on this
yeah,
side or
yeah,
this side.
yeah, yeah.
It's
It's
like,
an axis. Yeah, totally. X,
ooh,
Y,
I
X,
like
Y.
that. Yeah.
Um, and this shows up in a couple different ways for founders. Like one, because it's such a depends what sort of company you want to start, but a lot of founders know each other, and
Yeah.
kindness with like within the community as well as just like external of the founder community, like people know about it. So there's also
Yeah.
this similar almost to the like lifting thing. Like
Yeah.
kindness is also useful to you like succeeding in some way, but also figuring out how best to communicate about different things. For example,
Yeah.
a lot of my friends back from high school, they're not starting companies. That's not in their life journey. That's not part of their set of goals. But that doesn't mean that I can't be kind to them or be their friend. It just might mean that I might drop off the face of the earth for a while. But as long as I
Yes.
clearly communicate that and they know, I'm like, hey, like I'm really deep in a new project right now. And right now I need to like primarily talk to people who can help me and who are kind of like along the same path in order for me to achieve this goal. But if you ever really need me, I'll be here. I'm just going to be like not really here by default because I need to like work on other stuff. And so there's a balance. I think there is a path forward there, but just being conscientious, especially as you move on from your high school and think about like, how do you want to stay in touch with people from high school? How do you want to relate to them? How do you keep in touch with people from different stages of your life? I think that's one thing I would leave the audience. And then other thing is like, as you shift between different life stages. I like to keep different selves at different ages in mind as guides. I
Mhm.
like to think about my child self and my 80-year-old self.
Yeah.
Because I think that weirdly, I'm using bell curve incorrectly here, but I think
Mhm.
that the edges of your lifetime are when you're the truest to yourself. When you're a kid
Yeah.
and you haven't entered school, you're not really like in social interactions that you're like perceiving yourself and changing yourself in order to fit within a group or a given context. And when you're old, you just don't give a crap. You just don't care,
Yeah.
right? Like you're just like, I'm old. I might die any day. Like I'm just gonna live my life the way I want to live my life. And
Yeah.
in the middle is all the confusing components where we're like, oh, who
Yeah.
am I? Like, who do I want my friends to be? What are my values? How do people think about me? And the self is obviously socially constructed. So I'm not saying that's a less true version of yourself, but I think that keeping in mind like these guides at each end of your life and how what they would think about different decisions you're making, like what did your kid self dream of before you were
Yeah.
bullied for like dreaming about it? Or like what does your like wise self say with the grace and wisdom of having made a lifetime of good decisions say to you about the decision you're about to make? I just like to think of these people like when I make decisions and in thinking about how I want to conduct my day to day. So I'll leave that with as
I
last two
love
pieces.
that. I'm gonna make like Jasmine statements of like instead of having like a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other shoulder, which can like way over hyperbolize like the good and bad of things. Just have like an 80-year-old version of yourself on one shoulder being like, this is what wise you would say. And then
Yeah,
like a little baby version of yourself or like a cute little
little
toddler. Yeah,
Megan.
being like, this is what like young, exciting, like passionate you would say about this situation. Cause like, oh my gosh, I always think of it as like my creative side and my wise side, but like that's so nice because so many people do visualize that angel on their shoulder and their devil on their shoulder because it's such a historical, artifact that's passed on through stories of decades and like all different cultures. But I think it can have an unhealthy connotation to it where people think to be angelic, they have to be like overly nice and they have to overly show up for people. Like with your friends, you don't have to show up for them every single step of the way and like be an angel, but being there for them and it counts means they'll be there for you and it counts. And then like, but then the opposite is like you can't be like crazy mean to everyone to get what you want. But it's like if it's an old you and a baby you, the advice
Yeah.
gets so much better and like a lot more practical. Oh my gosh, I'm obsessed with that. Wow. Okay. Okay. Well, that was so fun. That wraps up all of my questions. I'm gonna end here.
Thank you
That
so much, Megan. That was so
yeah.
fun. All great
Okay.
questions.
Yes, and I'm gonna wrap with a quick summary because I didn't get into all of Jasmine's accolades. This was like a beautiful, diverse conversation of learnings from Jasmine. She did have an epic start to her company and an exit within, I think it was 6 months, right? Something like
Yeah.
that. Yes, which is legendary. Like, I don't think I know anyone else who's done that. She is like an absolutely fantastical author with book deals and just a true professional creative, all of the things. And it was so cool to learn about how she thinks about school and education and life. So thank you so much, Jasmine. This has been amazing.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Woo, 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 woo! First interview in the books. If you have questions for Jasmine, include them in the comment section below or go message her on Twitter. Her handle is at @J_Jasmine Wang, and she would really appreciate a follow. If you're interested in more interviews like this, make sure to subscribe to this channel and push that notification bell so you are informed every time I post a new interview. If there's a topic or entrepreneur or question that you want to be included in a future interview, make sure you comment that below so I can see it. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you next time. Bye!